Thanks so much for joining us today. I think we have an interesting slew of speakers today from the Singapore market. And the topic of the conversation today is really about scaling from Southeast Asia to Hong Kong and unlocking those growth opportunities. So my name is YC. I'm a partner at AC Ventures, which is a VC fund, which is really uninteresting and unimportant. So let's get our speakers to actually give a quick introduction to themselves, just a minute max. Let's start with you, Dione.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Dione, CEO at Love Bonito. So we're one of the largest women's wear brands in Southeast Asia. Scale at around 9 digits, right? I think we started actually 14 years ago entirely bootstrap, but with a mission to really be the most thoughtful brand when it comes to fashion for women, because we believe that historically fashion for women has been very disempowering if you think about the notion of fashion, right? It's all about looking great, high heels, but not about form, function, comfort. And we believe that the modern Asian woman deserves way more, right, than just sort of disposable wear and throw fashion. So that's us, right? We have a footprint of so we started actually digitally native, right? Online first, which is quite interesting for a brand, right? Back in the day where brands actually started offline. And then we expanded omni-channel in the last sort of 4 to 5 years. We have a footprint of over 25 stores now and a footprint across Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and then we do cross-border e-commerce to other sort of Western markets where there are huge actually Asian diaspora markets in population, like Australia and the US. So that's us in a nutshell.
Thanks, Dione. Hey, Karl, tell us a bit more about yourself and Sourcy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Karl Chan. I'm the founder and CEO of Sourcy. So I'm actually born and raised in Hong Kong, so it's a little bit homecoming for me. We are a Singapore-based AI company, and we use AI to help brands like Love Bonito to develop and source better products. So what we do is we have an AI scraper that can collect all the e-commerce and social media insights, translating those insights into manufacturable products, have the products manufactured and shipped to our customers within 1 to 2 months. So our belief is that the world is shifting from a more like a Zara-like model to a more like a Shein-like model. So Shein launched around 2 million products last year in 2024. And we know like a lot of brands are aspiring to become like them, right? So like our AI is furthering this mission to help them transition to a faster product development cycle.
Cheers, Karl. How about you, Shin? I mean, you started this company when you were still in school, if I'm not mistaken. So it'd be great to share a bit more about that background and how this came to be.
So hello everyone, my name is Shin. I'm a Singaporean and my company actually deal in smart mobility. Right, smart mobility has been forsaken for so long, right? Since we have Grab that came out like maybe 10 over years ago. But what we actually do here is we leverage on the likes of AI. We use dynamic routing algorithms to create a smart pooling product, right, in developing cities. And what we actually do right now is on larger formats of vehicles such as MPVs, buses. Just imagine a smarter version of that to send you from your home directly to workplace as well as schools and back. So that's what we do in a nutshell. Currently we are in Singapore. We expanded quite well in Singapore. We expanded over to India as well, especially in the Delhi NCR where we hit a product market fit within months. And now we're here in Hong Kong. And yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Super, thanks so much. So for the purposes of today's discussion, we're going to cover a couple broad areas. We're going to start with overall the motivations and the ambitions. We're going to follow up with the strategy and adaptations that you have to take to actually expand to the country like Hong Kong. And last but not least, we're going to talk a bit more about the mutual benefits and the collaboration opportunities between yourselves and the counterparties and the ecosystem parties over here. So maybe let's kick off with, I mean, I've been a founder myself a couple times, and I know how difficult it is not just to expand the business, but also in terms of expanding to new markets. So it'd be great, maybe we'll start with you, Dione, with regards to thinking about expanding your markets outside of initially Singapore to outside of Southeast Asia. How was that initial inspiration? And moreover, I think, what were the biggest pitfalls off the back of that in that experience?
I guess because we started, so again, I guess our journey as a brand has been quite different, right? So I think 14 years ago, we started online first. So I think the beauty when you start online first and you're digitally native is that you have a wealth of information and data that we could easily see, right? I think we were one of the first few brands that were on LiveJournal, right? But this is before the .com days, before Shopify, everything sort of came up, right? Taobao and all of that as well, right? So I think that was on the blogging days, right? Then we were first on Instagram. So for us, then it was always sort of like data, customer insights first. We can easily see where maybe there are interests, right, and demands coming from social media, for example. And then where also maybe there is already a little bit of a latent demand, right, or demand in market, right, for brands from even cross-border, and customers are actually willing to wait because they really want the product, which gives you a very good sense of whether you have UVP. I think is what I call that, right? Do you have a unique value proposition to actually fit and sell to the market, right? So I think that was really sort of like the first approach that we always took that allowed us to then identify markets to scale into. I think investors, I guess, always ask, right, in the past, right, sort of like product market fit, right? And they always ask you questions around TAM, right? But I think a lot of times also as a brand, I think a marketplace model is very, very different. But as a brand, it's always about how do you scale how do you do it in a very scalable way, in a highly efficient way, right? So I think from your, I think what you shared, what you asked as well, right? So from Singapore, actually, we started thinking about, hey, instead of like product to market fit, right? Where is that also market to product fit, right? I.e., we want to identify very quickly, like how you do it on Facebook, lookalike markets to where we are already thriving in Singapore, where I think just to share, right, we're the top local brand in Singapore, right? A very, very high penetration of the market right now, right? So we know that we are the number one sort of wardrobe brand in the market, right? But for us to also scale efficiently, right, in a less costly way, it's about how do we also diversify as little as possible, right, in a strategic way when we expand into a new market. Because for a mono brand, I guess the diversification kills you because it's a working capital game, right? If I have to diversify every single product for my 6 countries, I will have a range of like, many, many, many thousands of SKUs, but maybe you can share me, I guess, tips also around the Sourcy end. So many SKUs, right? It's very, very hard to then transfer inventory as well. And then you'll be left with dead stock, right? Which I think is the worst thing from a working capital standpoint. So for us, it was always identifying similar lookalike markets. Hong Kong actually came out as one of them, right? I think just to share, as a market, in a sense, similar to Singapore, right? Where if you think about it on the surface, seemingly competitive, seemingly very entrenched, right? You have very, very old brands around that's been here for a while. You have a lot of luxury brands that have been around for a while. But actually, if you look at the brick and mortar landscape as well, at least in the past sort of 5-10 years, there has been very, very little innovation of new brands coming to market. More recently, only we see, right, more active wear brands like On Running and all that coming through, Lulu opening on the high street in Queens Road. But in the past, there wasn't that much interest, right, and interesting things, apart from, even streetwear, let's say, right, for HBX, Hypebeast, and all of that. So for us, it was like, hey, the insight of like, I think we can offer something very different to the market. Number 2, I think for us also, we're very clear around the key occasion entry for us as a brand, which is actually smart casual, more workwear, right? Which I think a lot of brands, even Shein, doesn't really do. It's all in casual, trendy fashion, right? So for us, the other insight was, I think there is a workwear gap in the market. Big incumbents are like G2000, right, that haven't innovated in like years, right? Whether it's because of legacy and family construct. So there's ability to do something interesting there, undercut the market in price, but really provide value to the market, right? When it comes to product value, number 1. Number 2, then what we really focus on when we go to market, we do a lot of community events and like marketing activations, yeah. So I think that's how we think about sort of like expansion. Maybe a little bit different, right? I think as a mono brand, maybe versus like a pure marketplace model, yeah.
Sure. So I mean, my takeaway was that like starting digitally native, that you had that not just inspiration, but the insight to basically think about other markets. You knew where your customers were thinking about, hoping for you to enter, and then from there you can take it the next steps. Karl, I mean, so you're an interesting breed. I mean, you're from Hong Kong, but you started a company in Singapore. But also your product or the offering that you provide to customers really encompasses a global or regional type play. So how do you think about that, especially since you first started the business in Singapore, and then how do you think about entering back the Hong Kong market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I agree with Dione on everything that she said. I think like for me, like it's in addition to the demand side, more on the supply side. Since we're a sourcing company, a lot of the manufacturers are from China, right? And if I have to do a round trip from Singapore to Shenzhen, right? Like it's a 4-hour flight, and then including all the check-in, check-out, like things like that, it would be probably like a 10-hour trip, round trip. But then from Hong Kong, it's more like a 2 hours, right? So like I think just the proximity to the mainland market is making it very easy. And then on top of that, I think another thing is talent. So I think in Southeast Asia, it's very easy to hire product managers, developers, and things like that. But for our line of business, we need to have some AI researchers and machine learning engineers and things like that. And it's just not that easy to hire from Singapore. And in Hong Kong, we can attract some of the mainland Chinese applicants, and the talent pool for those professions is just much deeper here.
Gotcha. I mean, from a Sourcy perspective, you're in the supply chain business. You need to be close to supply, I guess, as well as demand. And then from a talent perspective, that kind of makes sense. Shin, yours is a hyper-local business. And by definition, on one hand, you may want to focus in a particular market until you achieve a particular density. But at the same time, you had also quickly explored different markets such as India and now Hong Kong. What was the defining moment that made you think about, I guess, diversifying away from Singapore and thinking about Hong Kong as a market? What were those top 3 points that made you look in that direction and say, I'm going to plant a flag here and start deploying fleets?
Well, it's actually a lot of research about our core users, which are typically staffs as well as students. And actually, we see a very interesting kind of trend where people are starting to work more globally, right? For example, as Singaporean, we are seeing a big workforce actually moving towards Malaysia. And we do see that actually in the advent of future mobility, not just being hyper-local, but can we apply the likes of a more flexible busing or even commuting option towards cross-border transportation? And when you look into this kind of journey, it gets incredibly easy to choose your markets. For example, in Singapore, we can easily expand to JB, KL. When you look into India, of course, India is big on cross-border transportation, and now coming into Hong Kong is a no-brainer that we will actually be expanding towards the GBA area. So when you look at a transport company like us, a smart mobility, we actually use the likes of data, right, as well as we follow our customer journey to actually choose the areas that we actually expand in. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cheers, Shin. So I think the core of this discussion really should be focused on the execution and the strategy behind the expansion plans. I mean, having been in your shoes before, I think the most important thing is actually, no plan survives contact the enemy. So until you get hit in the face and everything falls to crap, right? So Dione, I think given that you're effectively setting up stores and you're selling online at the same time, I believe about 50% of your sales are coming online, offline. What were your biggest surprises when you entered the Hong Kong market? And what were the biggest assumptions that were very quickly shattered when you did that?
It's been a long journey actually when we first started to enter Hong Kong, right? So this was actually, so we did a pop-up first, right? I think that was our first sort of foray into Hong Kong. To be honest, I guess this was the time of also, I think the protests then happened. So actually this was the first sort of maybe big, more challenge, right? I think that we worked through as well. Because I think it sort of like halted plans, right? Sort of for a little bit. Because we did a first pop-up along Queen's Road Central, right? So I think maybe just first time also, even navigating, right? Maybe a little bit of even a political, right? Or a situation environment as well, actually. I mean, even down to details, right? I think for the first time also, even of our teams, right? Even just BCP plans, routes to going home, right? I think when the protests actually happened, I think a lot of it, but because it was a pop-up and we were managing the teams from Singapore, it was really very, very hard to actually do that, right? So actually after that, we kind of stopped actually expansion into the market from an offline perspective for a bit first, till waters were a little bit more calm before entering into the market. But I would say, I think back after that as well, I think a lot of it boils down to very specific customer behavior and preferences. But I think it's not just for Hong Kong, right, but for all markets. Right? I'll give you a very specific example, right? So I think in Hong Kong, especially versus Southeast Asia, people walk a lot more. So it means even when women look for bottoms and dresses and skirts, people prefer a little bit more flare, right, and a little bit more space to move, right? I think in actually Southeast Asia, because women and people are usually quite lazy and usually take Grab everywhere, right? Or, I think you don't really walk so much because it's so hot. Even the bottoms and the silhouettes are actually really quite different, just to give you something very, very specific, right? So I think the types of silhouettes also then that we actually merchandise in the market would be also slightly different, right? In terms of color preferences, we know it's also quite different, right? I think in Hong Kong versus Southeast Asia prefers a lot more prints, a lot more brighter colors as well. Hong Kong is a little bit more neutral also. So even in terms of just colors and the color shades that we also then merchandise in market, also, to be honest, slightly different. I think those are just some examples, right? So to be honest, I think it's also through just learning, trial and error, and then iterating through. Apart from that, to be honest, I think the third piece when we expanded offline, for sure, right? I think everyone has warned us always, Hong Kong real estate. Please watch out. Yes, I think it's For sure, right? I think in terms of, let's say, pricing, all of that, maybe it's a little bit competitive as well. But I do believe, I think end of the day, I think if the product holds, right, and your metrics, 2 metrics work, right, I think that's fine, right? 2 metrics that we look at would be, I think store 4-wall profit margin, right, has to make sense, and ensuring that your pricing also to fit the market, because every market has a different 2 costs that always varies, right? It's rental, and then it's labor costs, right? Hong Kong, of course, labor cost is a lot higher than Southeast Asia, so ensuring that that's factored in properly in your economics. And then the other metric would be just honestly payback period, right, that we look at as well. So I think really just back to basics. But I guess for me, because my background came from tech actually and e-commerce, going into the offline world, I think for a lot of us in the team was like a learning of like, oh, suddenly it's the traditional world, right, that we're learning. I know this morning we heard about AI and everything, but for us it was like a reverse, right? Learning the traditional world after coming from a tech e-commerce world, where, I think you have plenty of data, right? And suddenly you're flying in with like maybe lesser data as well. And it's longer lead cycles, right, to make certain changes too.
Understand. So basically, starting with a hypothesis, going to a market, being iterative and learning off the back of that, and then going back to basics to ensure that your fundamentals are correct. Now, Karl, I think you position Sourcy as an AI-powered company. But I think from a supply chain perspective, as you can imagine, I think unfortunately you can't automate everything. You can't automate all the humans out of jobs and stuff like that. So when you started this business, and especially when you started doing more cross-border, what was your biggest learning point? Because obviously I'm guessing that from your initial point of view, it's like, how do I ensure a relatively or a fully asset-light type model where I can deploy as little hard resources as much as possible to make this work?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sourcy actually has offices in 8 different countries. Like even though we are rather small team, so like we have colleagues from very different cultures and nationalities. So I would say like just at the very beginning, like even before talking about the market differences, the work culture are quite different. So like even though, for example, Singapore and Hong Kong are from the same time zone, right? Usually Hong Kongers tend to stay later, but they also start their day a bit later. So like even though they are from the same time zone, sometimes like our Singaporean colleagues would start the day 2 hours earlier and end the day 2 hours earlier. And things like that, just like, I feel like something that I had to learn along the way, and then also trying to build kind of like a structure around bringing everyone together. So like sometimes we will basically have everyone fly into the same place. So for example, we just had our retreat last year in Bali. So like everyone can get to see each other. They can, finally get to put a face to the name, right, kind of thing. So they don't feel like they're working with internet friends. But then I also agree with Dione on a lot of the market localization points. So we were just chatting, actually for some of the Southeast Asian markets, even though we usually call them the same market, they are actually very different. And one example is, for example, the Philippines, right? Like the per capita GDP is not that high, but the average spending is very, very high, right? So like, places like that, when we work with our customers, when we design our product, we can actually afford to design slightly more premium products. Whereas, for example, in Indonesia, we would then go for value for money all the way, right? So like things like that, I think like just appreciating the cultural differences across the different markets is very key for cross-border.
Gotcha. Thanks, Karl. Hey, Shin, so from a fleet perspective, which is very different from renting real estate, I mean, so I guess arguably, like real estate and fleet management are similar size of a multifaceted coin. So especially as you had to split up your fleet, because for fleet management, you want specific density to make the economics work. When you started acquiring or sourcing fleets to manage on the ground in Hong Kong, what was your biggest misconception, especially thinking about fleet management from a Singaporean perspective coming to Hong Kong?
Well, definitely, we started our research back in August 2024. We plan to really spend maybe 6 months over here just to build a lot of relationships and understanding what's on ground, knowing fleet owners, knowing the stakeholders like corporates and schools. And we essentially came in, and we are researchers by heart, right? We came in with like a big hypothesis that actually to do business in Hong Kong, there has to be a lot of relationship management, there has to be some kind of trust. But one thing that actually we do see is that a lot of our stakeholders, including the fleet managers, are getting more data-driven. They're actually more inclined to understand, what do I need to do to really manage my fleet better? what do I need to do to make sure that my company or my school actually have more affordable transportation, but yet at the same time, I don't reduce my service quality. I think these are things that definitely we see on the inside that help us make a lot of the decisions that come over. Yeah, and it has been a real honor to actually see that Hong Kong as an economy is actually growing towards a more data-driven kind of trend. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that's extremely refreshing to see like stakeholders there become extremely data-driven, and it's going to be far easier for you to have a similar language, I guess, in mathematics or whatever you want to call it, in terms of making those decisions. Very briefly, as time is running out, before we move on to Q&A, I want to speak very briefly about like how the ecosystem in Hong Kong is able to support that expansion from Singapore over to Hong Kong. So from your perspectives, I mean, what would you like to see on a wish list in terms of, especially in your respective businesses? What would you like to see from the local Hong Kong ecosystem do in terms of being more supportive towards your particular businesses? Let's start with you, Karl, and then let's move around the room.
Sure. I think Hong Kong is positioning itself as the super connector per se, right, between China and the rest of the world. And I think, like the ecosystem has to double down on that. Like, for example, if, let's say, the Hong Kong ecosystem can provide for some access to some AI talent in China, as well as like proprietary enterprise deals with, like, let's say, DeepSeek and things like that, right? Then I'm sure it's going to be very attractive to, for example, Southeast Asian startups. And at the same time, I also feel like, Hong Kong venture capitalists, they have a good understanding of the capital market in general, compared to some of the Southeast Asian countries where the VCs over there are still more, I would say, early stage and maybe not as sophisticated in terms of thinking about exits and things like that. So I believe that the VC ecosystem can actually add a lot of value if they work with some of the Southeast Asian startups. And of course, like Southeast Asia is also a big market, right? So like I think it just makes a lot of sense for the VCs here to consider that too.
Understand. How about you, Dione? Like, especially given that you had started looking at the market a couple of years ahead, what from those learning points, what's your wish list in terms of asking from an ecosystem point of view?
Maybe two parts. I guess first, I think Hong Kong is in a very special, unique position, right? I think I was here recently, was it the HKTDC type event? There is a business of fashion one coming up, right? I think Hong Kong versus Southeast Asia is very well positioned, right? Especially as a bridge, also even with like when you think about the whole luxury world, right? And sort of global designer platform as well, that I don't think Southeast Asia really has that clout. I think perhaps being that bridge also to offer more, to perhaps match people together for really exciting collaborations, right? Which I think is the name of the game for the future, especially when you think about the consumer world, especially, just to rejuvenate sort of retail, right? And consumer spending and make it more interesting. I think that's one. I think from a VC sort of like, I guess we actually have one investor, right? I think from Hong Kong, right? Or Hong Kong, China. But I guess if you're looking into Southeast Asia also, sort of the acknowledgement and understanding, right, that Southeast Asia is very different, right? It's very, very different from Hong Kong. It's very different from Greater China. It's a very fragmented market that's totally different, right? I think like exactly what Karl said, right? I think we have to stop looking at things like Indonesia, big TAM, let's go for it. No, right? I think in specific sectors, it's really around also how much consumers are willing to spend, right? And actually spend, right, within that sector and within the price bracket, right, that you actually want to compete in. Because the stuff that actually moves, for example, in Indonesia, right, I think as you know, right, whether it's a TikTok shop or whatnot, is a very low price point, right, that actually maybe very few brands, even from Hong Kong and Singapore, can actually even play in, right? So I think maybe that the understanding and acknowledgement to view it as a very, very different region altogether as well. Then I think it helps, identify, unlock even more opportunities and maybe like gems, right, in the pool.
Thank you, Dione. How about you, Shin? Anything to add on that front?
Well, definitely a lot of good points are put up. But I think that generally I can speak from overseas startup kind of point of view where I come into Hong Kong. The first kind of sense that I feel is that Hong Kong is very open to foreign startups to come in. Not only are there funds and grants to really help accelerate our growth and team setup over here, I think one thing that could be really doubled down there is really the kind of connections that the government is putting in, right, to help the overseas startups actually grow and solve problem areas in Hong Kong right now. For example, we were actually working hand in hand and quite closely knitted with Invest Hong Kong. So Invest Hong Kong actually, other than just introducing us the typical funds and grants, they're actually also taking another step to actually help RushOwl to talk to key stakeholders. For example, like the airport authorities. For example, like certain areas that might not have good public transportation. These are things that I'll call them really, you can't quantify kind of efforts that I think that Hong Kong is doing really well to do. Yeah.
I mean, we can clearly see as evidence from this event itself how much effort the entire government is really putting into the ecosystem. So thank you very much. So maybe in the interest of time, we'll open up the questions to the floor, and maybe we can afford to take about a handful of questions. So from a Q&A perspective, given that we have three pretty solid entrepreneurs that have built sizable businesses over the last decade or so, for me, I would definitely ask questions from an execution point of view, from a business standpoint. But feel free to ping them on that front. Yes.
I'm a big fan of Love Bonito, of course, and I'm also a startup founder from Hong Kong. I just wanted to learn about your experience. Expanding your Singaporean fashion and business into Hong Kong. What are the challenges that you see between these two markets? Because I know a lot of people talk about the similarities between Singapore and Hong Kong. And I would also like to get some insights of expanding, my brand into Singapore as well. We are a consumer food products.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the question and the love and support. I guess key differences, yeah, we talked about it a little bit. We're still learning, to be honest, right? I think for Hong Kong, because we are a Southeast Asia brand, okay, what we don't do well, to be very honest, is fall/winter. Because nobody really understands it that well. So I think actually that's the biggest challenge, to understand the fall/winter market, to do it well, especially seasonality, because Southeast Asia, we really don't have to do that. So to be honest, I think that's one thing we're learning. Two, to be honest, I think, especially now with also different trends, right, and Shenzhen, all of that also, right, of course, and the way customers are flowing. To be honest, actually in Hong Kong, I think it's a restart of understanding the market again, because the the customer shopping has changed a lot, versus actually the Hong Kong of, like, to be very honest, like 3-4 years ago, right? So for us, actually, even as a brand now, even though we have 4 stores in Hong Kong, right, and quite a presence, we're actually still relearning a little bit, to be very honest. But I think those two areas. I think key tips for you if you're expanding to Singapore, right? Is it? Okay, Singaporeans versus customers in Hong Kong are a lot more simple and prefer more guides. That's why simplicity is always key, right? I'll give you one specific example, right? Like things like dresses. Dresses and jumpsuits as a category work better in Singapore, far better than it does in Hong Kong, because customers in Singapore don't want to think. You give me something, I don't need to pair, I will wear it. In Hong Kong, people, I think, more trendy, as I see in the audience. You prefer your own style and aesthetic as well, so you'll prefer the flexibility and freedom to pair. I think that's one very, very key thing. Categories are really quite different. Two, we talked about it just now, colors are quite different. Southeast Asia is more colorful, so think about your color mix as well and prints, versus in Hong Kong, which is more neutral.
Super, thank you very much. In the interest of time, unfortunately, we're going to have to call this a close, but I think the participants will be available for conversations right after. So perhaps with that, I would like to take the opportunity to thank Dione, Karl, and Shin so much for this chat, and really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.